Welcome to Tattletale. Here's today's story. I thought it was a glitch. Until it happened again. I was down to my last $14.17. Not in cash. In my entire bank account. No savings. No side hustle. No family backup. Just two wrinkled bills in my jacket pocket, and whatever loose change lived at the bottom of my backpack. The past 2 months had been hell. I lost my job at the warehouse over some broken inventory scanner that wasn't even assigned to me. They didn't even let me explain. Just blamed me, walked me out like a criminal, and left me with one final paycheck that barely covered 2 weeks of rent. After that, the spiral was fast. Job applications went unanswered. Rent piled up. Utilities got cut off. And last week, my landlord finally lost patience. "You've got 3 days," he said, not unkindly. After that, I'm changing the locks. I sold everything that might be worth something. Old speakers, my microwave, even my second pair of shoes. I lived off canned beans and tap water. I slept cold, and I hoped, desperately, that something would change. That morning, I hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours. I counted the coins and decided I could afford a cheap sandwich from the corner store. I walked 3 blocks, picked out the cheapest thing I could find, and got to the register only to realize I didn't have enough. I was short by 38 cents. I mumbled an apology, left the sandwich, and walked out with a red face and a hollow stomach. But then I remembered, I still had that $14 in the bank. Just enough for something small to eat. Maybe even stretch it over 2 days if I was careful. So I walked to the gas station ATM near 12th and Main, slipped in my card, typed in $10.00, or so I thought. In my tired, hungry haze, I must have added an extra digit, because I typed $100, and the machine gave it to me. I blinked at the crisp bills sliding out like it was nothing. It took a full 5 seconds before I even reached out to grab them. There had to be a mistake. Maybe it approved a withdrawal I didn't have the funds for. I hit balance inquiry. The screen flashed. Available balance, $10,014.17. I stared, refreshed the screen. Same number. I looked around, expecting someone to walk over. A siren, a flashing red light, something, but nothing happened. So I took the money and walked home, shaking. The whole way, I clutched my backpack like someone was going to rip it away. My legs felt like jelly. My stomach growled, but my head spun. Back at my apartment, I laid the bills on the floor. 10 crisp $10s. And still, $9, 914.17 in my account. I checked the banking app. Deposit, plus $10, 000.00. Memo, blank. Sender, anonymous. There was no history, no trail, no explanation. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking the police were going to show up, or that maybe this was some money laundering scheme and I was the patsy, that someone would burst in and take it all back, or worse. But nothing happened. That night was the beginning of something I couldn't understand, something I would spend months trying to hide, and years trying to uncover. I didn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I pictured the ATM security footage playing back in some backroom. A banker in a suit pausing the video, rewinding it, pointing at me on the screen like, "There, that's the guy." I kept expecting a call, a knock on the door, police tape, a cold floor and handcuffs. But the night passed in silence. No alerts, no frozen account, no oops, wrong deposit from the bank. The next morning, I didn't touch the money. I made coffee using the last bit of instant powder I had and drank it black, bitter, and full of nerves. I checked my bank app a dozen times. The number didn't change. $9,914.17. Still there. By noon, my stomach gave in. I walked back to the corner store and bought that same sandwich, the one I couldn't afford the day before. This time, I paid in cash. The clerk didn't even blink. Just handed it to me like I wasn't a guy who technically stole money from a machine 24 hours ago. Except I didn't steal anything, did I? I didn't hack the ATM. I didn't trick it. I just made a mistake. A mistake that somehow worked. But still, none of this made sense. After I ate, I sat on the floor and opened my laptop. It barely worked anymore, but it was enough to Google everything I could think of. Accidental bank deposit. ATM gave too much money, what happens? Can you keep money that isn't yours? Most of it boiled down to this. If the bank made a mistake, they'll reverse it. And if you spend it before they do, they might press charges. Jail. Fines. Court. I checked the bank app again. Still there. No reversals. No adjustments. No calls. I didn't dare spend more. Instead, I opened a notebook and started writing everything down. Time, date, location of the ATM, how much I withdrew, what buttons I pressed. I even sketched the screen layout. It felt stupid, but it also felt like something a sane person would do. That night, I moved the cash into a shoebox, hid it under the sink behind the leaking drain. I kept telling myself I'd return it once they figured out their error. But inside, a tiny part of me whispered something else. What if it wasn't an error? The next 2 weeks, I lived like a fugitive. I kept job hunting, even though I could now technically afford not to. I didn't use the money. I didn't touch the account. I didn't tell a soul. And then it happened again. It was exactly 30 days later. I only noticed because I logged in on a whim. I wasn't even planning to. I just needed to see the number again. Needed to make sure it was still real. I opened the app. Available balance, $19,914.17. My heart stopped. I checked the transaction history. Deposit, plus $10,000.00. Memo, blank. Sender, anonymous. Date, 30 days after the first one. I stared at it for what felt like hours. 2 deposits. Same amount. Same format. No name. This wasn't a glitch. It was intentional. Someone, somewhere, was giving me $10,000 a month. And I had no idea who or why. I didn't touch my phone for the next hour. I just stared at the wall. My ears were ringing, like my body was warning me this was getting deeper than I thought. I stood up, paced, sat down again. I reopened the banking app, hoping I imagined it. Maybe I misread the balance. Maybe it refreshed wrong. Nope, still there. $19,914.17. Another clean, perfect $10,000. The same as before. No name, no note, just silence. That night, I didn't sleep again. I kept checking out the window, thinking someone was watching me. Like this was a test. Like any second someone in a black suit would knock and say, "We've been observing you. You passed. Come with us." But the door stayed quiet. No one came. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. I started investigating. Slowly, quietly. First, I called the bank, but carefully. I didn't ask about the deposit. Instead, I pretended I was just checking for any fraud alerts or recent suspicious activity on my account. The woman on the other end of the line was cheerful, polite. "Nope," she said. "Everything looks good on our end. You've got a couple deposits and 1 ATM withdrawal recently. Nothing odd." I felt a cold sweat form under my shirt. That meant they saw it. They knew the deposit happened, and they weren't treating it like a mistake. She didn't mention anything about errors or reclaiming funds. She didn't even sound curious, just like it was all normal. The next day, I opened a spreadsheet. I started tracking every dollar I spent. I created folders on my laptop, one named Deposits, another named Theories. Yeah, theories. I listed everything I could come up with. Distant relative inheritance. Government glitch. Illegal money laundering, scary thought. Some bored billionaire playing games. Anonymous donor. Mistaken identity. Surveillance experiment. But none of them made perfect sense. Why me? Why now? Why 10,000? I started watching my neighborhood more, noticing people I hadn't noticed before. The old man who always sat near the laundromat with a crossword book. The woman in the red coat who walked her dog past my building every evening at the same time. Even the mailman started to look suspicious. Was someone watching my reaction? I went to the ATM again, not to withdraw this time, but just to test it. I inserted my card, punched in my PIN, and printed my balance. Same number. Still untouched. Still real. Then I did something crazy. I typed in $20.00 for withdrawal. It spat out a crisp 20 without hesitation. I stood there, holding it, waiting again for a siren, a red light, a voice, anything. But it was just me, in silence, just like before. I walked home slowly, trying not to think like someone who had nearly 20 grand in their bank account. But it was hard, because as I walked past the bakery, I realized something. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't worried about food, or rent, or if I'd survive the next day. I had money, and more importantly, I had time. Time to figure this out. Time to live again. But also, time to mess up. The next week felt like walking on glass. I didn't tell anyone, not even Mike, the only friend I still talked to. He would have asked questions, the kind I didn't have answers to. I wanted to test a theory, So I waited until midnight and logged into my banking app again. Nothing changed. Still $19,894. Just dropped the key on the front desk and kept walking. I stopped using my name altogether. Even when I talked to myself, I started counting every person behind me when I walked, checking for reflections in glass that didn't match the angles, watching for shadows that didn't have feet. You might think I was going crazy, and maybe I was, but I knew something had shifted, because the next time I checked my bank account, it wasn't just a deposit. It was a withdrawal. $10,000 gone. Just removed. No log. No authorization. Just a drop in balance. Balance. $72,014.39. I stared at the screen in the back of a cafe in a random town, my finger hovering over the refresh button. How could that happen? The stream never took money. It only gave, didn't it? Another message hit the burner. Unknown number again. Stream repayment initiated. Reverse transfer number 001. Amount, 10,000. Recipient, tier, 3 clearance entity / code name. Tracer. The Tracer? What the hell was Tracer? Or who? I tried calling Alex again. No answer. That night, I stayed in a rest stop bathroom. No motel. No rentals. Just a metal door and a sink I pretended to clean my face in for hours. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the mirror and whispered to myself, "You are still you. You are still real. You are still here." Because I had to say it. Otherwise, I might forget. The next day, I did what I hadn't done in weeks. I went back to my hometown. I needed to remember where this all started. Not the ATM, not the note, not the stream, but before all of it, my old neighborhood was smaller than I remembered. The trees taller, the cracks in the sidewalks deeper. I walked past the apartment I'd been evicted from, the one where I'd lived when I had $14 to my name and was surviving off vending machine peanuts and dollar store noodles. Someone else lived there now. They had plants in the window, a wind chime. It made me pause, because for a second, I wanted to knock. Ask them if they'd heard anything, seen anything strange. Ask if they'd noticed a man in a black coat standing in the hall 3 months ago. But I didn't. I just stood there, wondering what my life would have been if the ATM had said insufficient funds. I left the old apartment and kept walking. Down streets I hadn't touched in years. Past the bus stop where I used to wait in the rain with a bag of laundry and no umbrella. Past the corner where I once sat for 2 hours eating half a bag of chips slowly because I didn't know when I'd afford the next meal. I was hoping the walk would bring clarity. But instead, all I felt was distance, like the life I used to live was someone else's, and I'd only inherited the memories. I stopped outside the old convenience store, the same one where I'd stood, broke and embarrassed, counting change and still falling short for a sandwich. That was the day I remembered thinking, if something doesn't change, I'm not going to survive this. I almost forgot what it felt like to believe that. But I hadn't forgotten the day everything did change. I sat on the curb and pulled out the tracer. Still blinking. Slower now, but steady. It hadn't gone blue again. It hadn't stopped entirely either. Whatever was tracking me still was. I thought back to the withdrawal. Someone, or something, had taken $10,000 from the stream. And I had no idea why. Until I got another message. This time, it came from the laptop I hadn't touched in a week. A notification window. No app. No sender. Just a black bar with white letters. Tier 3 debt acquired. Repayment due upon next contact. Debt. Repayment. Next contact. So that was the trade. The money wasn't just a gift. It was a test. And maybe a contract. That night, I slept in my car near the edge of town. I didn't go to a motel. Didn't trust any place with a lock someone else might control. Sometime after midnight, I dreamed I was walking backward into a tunnel, flashlight flickering. And behind me, something moving. Not running. Just following. Breathing in rhythm with my own. I woke up drenched in sweat. And the first thing I did? Check the tracer. Still blinking. But slower. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to the place it started. Not the ATM. Not the bank. But the observatory. The one where I first saw the file with my name. Where I first heard continuity. Where the door opened and I stepped into something I didn't understand. That was months ago. Maybe they'd moved. Maybe the place was abandoned now. Maybe it was a dead end. But if anyone could explain the debt, the withdrawal, the thing outside my door, it was them. I drove back into the mountains. Fog hanging low over the road like something sleeping. The closer I got, the more the car's GPS began to glitch. recalculating, losing signal, then returning. But I didn't need directions anymore. I remembered every turn. The observatory looked the same, maybe more rundown. The satellite dish was rusted over. One of the windows had been boarded up. The old parking lot had weeds climbing out of every crack in the asphalt. But it was still there. I walked to the hatch in the back, swiped my card. The lock clicked. Stairwell lights buzzed to life. The hallway was darker than I remembered. No buzz from the servers. No hum of filtered air. Just silence. I walked past the door where I'd first met the man with the folder. Now empty. Dust on the chair. A flickering light overhead. But something had changed. At the end of the hall, a door that used to be sealed, completely shut, was now slightly open. A crack, barely an inch, and cold air was spilling out from the gap. I approached slowly, pushed it open. Inside, a stairwell spiraling downward, much deeper than anything I'd seen before. Concrete, steel supports, and at the very bottom, barely visible, a dim orange light. The air was heavy, not just cold, but thick, like it carried memory. I took the first step, then another, then another. At the bottom was a chamber, circular, low ceiling, no doors, no windows. In the center, a chair, bolted to the ground. And in that chair sat a man. His face was hidden in shadow, head slumped forward like he was sleeping. But I recognized him instantly. The gray in the beard, the shape of the shoulders. The man from the relay, the one who first said my name, told me about my father, gave me the card. Except now he looked pale, faded, like he hadn't moved in weeks. I took a step forward. He didn't flinch. Then I saw the thing in his hand. Not a weapon. A photo. Of me. Suddenly, the tracer buzzed in my pocket. Wild, strobing, red and blue flashes alternating like a siren. I dropped to one knee, clutching my chest. I couldn't breathe. Then the lights in the chamber dimmed, until the only thing still glowing was the chair itself. And that's when I saw it. Behind the man, a figure, not human, not completely. It stood there, arms too long, head tilted like it was trying to understand me, and its body shimmered, like a reflection on the surface of moving water. But no eyes, just a smooth face. And then, it moved. I couldn't move. Not from fear, at least not entirely. It was something deeper, heavier, like gravity had tripled in that moment, pressing down on my chest, on my knees, on the air itself. The figure behind the man didn't blink, didn't breathe. It just stood, half hidden in the shadows, shimmering like heat rising off asphalt. And yet, I knew it saw me. I didn't need eyes to tell me that. It felt like being looked at from the inside out, like it was flipping through me, page by page, and reading everything I'd ever been. The man in the chair stirred. Barely. A twitch of a finger. A breath that shuddered like it hadn't been drawn in days. And then his head lifted just an inch, just enough for his eyes to catch mine. They weren't the same as before. They were hollow. Not blank. Not blind. Just emptied. Like someone had turned the lights off behind them. He tried to speak. His lips barely parted. His voice was no louder than a whisper, but the sound curled through the air like smoke. You shouldn't have come back. The tracer in my pocket was strobing red now, no blue. No rhythm. Just panic. I backed up a step. Then another. The figure behind the man tilted its head again. It wasn't threatening, not in any physical sense. But there was something final about it. Like it was a lock. And I was the key. I turned and ran. The stairwell felt longer going up. Much longer. Each step groaned. My breathing hitched in my chest. The cold followed me like a hand pressed between my shoulder blades. When I reached the surface door, it was already open. Not cracked, open. And standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the morning light, was someone I didn't recognize. Short hair, gray hoodie, no expression. They didn't speak. They just held out a phone. And on the screen, a message. We've seen enough. The stream withdraws. Then they turned and walked away. I drove. Didn't know where. Didn't care. I just needed distance. From the observatory. From the shimmer. From the man in the chair who once welcomed me in. And now sat like an abandoned marionette with my photo in his hand. Later that day, I checked the bank. Balance, $0. No warning. No transfer history. Gone. Everything. I refreshed the app 5 times, thinking it was a glitch. It wasn't. And beneath the zeroed balance, there was a new notification. Tier 2 cleared. Account access revoked. Thank you for your participation. Memory logging complete. I was stunned. Not because I lost the money, but because I realized they never meant to keep me. I was just a test, a variable, a case study to be closed.